In this Wolcen builds guide, we're going to be covering a melee build that focuses on the use of fire and repeated strikes to ignite enemies. Wolcen has a complex passive skill tree, Gate of Fates, that can be difficult to figure out, and many mechanics are not always easy to min-max. In this build guide, I'll explain how to get the most from this build, so if you've been struggling to find a good warrior rogue build, then this guide is for you. The Flashing Fury build has a heavy focus on fire damage and makes good use of skills like Slayer's Fury to apply burning to enemies, as well as deal incredible damage to many targets, or one via repeated strikes. The build has exceptional mobility because of this skill, which snaps to the target quite quickly. Additionally, every enemy struck has a chance to produce a health globe, which we take advantage of to keep our health and force shield always topped up. Because you'll be spreading burning to many enemies at a time, as well as increasing your health globe drop chance, you'll be sucking up these babies faster than you can see on the screen, making the only way you'll die is a one-shot. Thankfully, we have answers for that as well. The Flashing Fury is a melee build, and as such it does have a focus on melee damage, and that means you will need to invest some points into toughness to keep yourself alive. It should be somewhere around half of your wisdom and agility stats. Additionally, you'll want agility to increase your attack speed, since attacking quickly with Slayer's Fury is the best way to make use of it, and you'll use wisdom to increase your ailment chance. You should look at every level up to place 4 points in wisdom, 4 in agility, and 2 in toughness. This will allow you to get done what you need to and still make you not die in every single enemy's one-shot attacks, though bosses will kill you if you don't roll or have Juggernaut up. In this section, we'll take a look at what skills should be on your skill bar to make this build work. This build uses a combination of rogue and warrior skills, which is possible due to a dagger in your offhand. The skills you want are as follows. Slayer's Fury. This skill is the heart of this build and is the reason we use a dagger in our offhand. It attacks insanely fast, does solid damage, and has great mobility. It's basically a one-click win button and is great at applying ailments via repeated strikes. I like to modify it with Crashing Moons for AoE damage, and Curse of the Dark Crescent since it transfers burning to other nearby enemies when they die. Flashing Blade seems to add no noticeable damage, so I recommend taking Crepuscular Escalation, which shoots out projectiles behind your target, hitting enemies behind them, usually setting them on fire. These projectiles will not hit the target you're attacking, except for targets that have larger models like bosses. This boosts your damage tremendously here and makes it one of the best skill modifiers you can have for this skill. Phantom Blades. This skill does a ton of damage and is great at softening up enemies so that you can AoE them down quickly. You can't convert this to fire, but you will do substantial fire damage with it anyway. You'll also want Gliding Friction to leave a trail on the ground that does damage over time. Blade Slinger is also good for extra charge, and so is Looming Fog of Battle for transferring ailments between enemies, spreading out your damage, helping to generate more globes. What's really great about this skill is that it has no rage cost, which is very important for this build because you want to save your rage for Slayer's Fury, which just burns right through it. Pardon the pun. When you need to top up your rage, toss these out to finish off enemies and gain some thanks to the Appetite for Bloodshed passive in the Warmonger skill tree. Juggernaut. We don't really need another attack skill, so this one works well on the defensive side to help keep you alive. Pop this when surrounded or face-to-face with a boss to prevent massive damage. You can also modify it to return fire damage with Prideful Deflagration modifier when you are struck by attacks when it is active, which synergizes nicely. This will often one-shot harder-hitting enemies like bosses and is a one-click win button that is further boosted by our fire damage increases. Sovereign Shout. This skill works amazing with this build and will double your attack speed, increase your life leech, increase your critical chance, and make it way more likely that health globes will drop when damaging enemies with skill modifiers we use. This skill is further impacted by the armor First Men's Legacy, which increases its effectiveness by 70%, which is what makes this build possible. But wait, there's more. It has no rage cost, and it generates rage when you use it, which is a must for this build. This build is rage hungry due to Slayer's Fury spam, and you'll need to use this to gain rage back since you'll have no way to dump willpower. Use it before combat to buff up when facing bosses, and use it mid-combat when surrounded by many enemies in order to generate more rage. Dusk Shroud. This skill is mostly used for damage buff since it'll add about 30% increase in shadow damage per strike. That's a lot of damage. It also gives you a huge movement speed buff when you take the Light Swift Retraction skill modifier, helping you get around maps more quickly. Shifting along walls will also make your force shield begin to regenerate instantly when dropped, which helps out a lot. In short, keep this up at all times if possible. Figuring out how to align your Gate of Fates is one, if not the hardest parts about making a build in Wolcen, and generally takes a respec or two before you've gotten it right. In this section, I want to show you how I set this up for maximum performance. Soldier. Soldier is first, and you want to take Heavy Blows and Zealous Might for critical damage and just damage in general. Make sure to grab the wild card and the 3 nodes next to it for further increased critical chance. You'll also want Disciplined in the Heat of Battle for rage management, but you can come back for these ones later if you're not having issues with it. Warmonger. Warmonger is next up, and you literally want just about every node in this tree, but it's good to make your way through it via Unleashed Power in order to get to Child of Fury quickly. You can come back for the other great passives like Bestial Frenzy and Appetite for Bloodshed later. Child of Fury. Child of Fury contains probably the two most important passives for this build in the skills Furious Appetite and Frenzied Blows. Furious Appetite changes the whole dynamic of the build, allowing you to regain Rage instead of Willpower, allowing you to use melee skills more often. You want to aim for this one quickly, trying to get it before level 25 if possible. Frenzied Blows will increase your damage by double for double the rage cost when you're above 75 rage. This makes it very important to increase your max rage and also to reduce your rage cost. You won't worry about this too much early on in the game, but as you start to approach endgame, you'll want to really focus on this as it really increases your damage with Slayer's Fury if you can stay above 750 rage most of the time. There are a lot of good other passives in this skill tree like Flurrying Flames and Blistering Embrace, so you'll spend quite a bit of time here. Once you have these, you'll want to move over onto Scholar. Scholar. Next, you'll head over to Scholar and pick up passives that give you rage cost reduction in Steadfast, and then grab Emotional Intelligence for increased max rage. Increased Awareness is really what you're here for though, since it pulls health globes to you, making it so that you heal without moving constantly. And once you gain Thirst for Knowledge, it'll restore your Force Shield as fast as it gets hit, really making the only danger to you one-shot attacks. Kabbalist. Much like Child of Fury, you'll spend a good amount of time here. First, you want to grab Grievous Afflictions and then work on other passives that affect ailments like Power of the First Men, Master of Curses, and Insidious Decay. Also pick up things that increase ailment damage like Crippling Decrepitude. Warlock. You'll need to bounce through Ranger in order to get here. All we're really interested in is Duty to Exterminate and Twisted Obligation for increased max rage. This gives you more of a buffer before you drop below 750 rage, helping to bump your damage. Abyssal Shaper. Last up is Abyssal Shaper, which has a ton of good passives that can help you if you're doing shadow damage and applying Curse. At this point in the game, you'll want to look for Shadow on your weapon or take the Piercing Shadow skill modifier for shadow damage that can apply Curse. The reason for this is because passives like Occult Affliction and Unholy Omen will increase your damage tremendously. In this section, we'll be covering the type of equipment that you want for the Flashing Fury build. In order to make this build work, you'll need two one-handed weapons, and one must be a dagger or pistol. These give you access to Slayer's Fury, Dusk Shroud, and Phantom Blades. I have not tried this build with a pistol, so I recommend a dagger, but theoretically you could use a pistol if you wanted. You'll ideally want one with both fire and physical damage on it, but fire and shadow damage is what you'll want at endgame. Additionally, Rend is not bad for bleeding damage. You'll want to have 3 offensive 1 sockets on it, and you can reroll these at Xana for start. 3 is hard to get, but 2 is fairly easy with a few rolls. Drop Topaz into these for increased fire damage, or Sapphire for increased shadow damage later on in the game. In your main hand, you'll want a one-handed weapon with the same things, fire damage and ideally physical or shadow damage. Roll 3 offensive 1 sockets for even more fire damage. I used Envy's Denial for about 20 levels with this build, and it did extremely well. On your armor, you'll want lots of Force Shield, and this means Sorcerer armor ideally. Look for elemental damage bonuses, and later on in the game, look for Wisdom, which will increase both elemental and occult damage. If you can get Wisdom and either of these types, that would be ideal. Always try to find armor that has Rage and Willpower cost reduction on there as well, because it will help reduce the cost of Slayer's Fury tremendously. This means your ideal armor would be Sorcerer's armor with plus Wisdom, plus Rage and Willpower cost reduction, plus occult or elemental damage, and plus Force Shield. And on your accessories, look for fire and physical damage on attack, and later shadow and fire damage. Be sure it's not on spellcast. Roll support 2 slots on these so that you can boost your fire or shadow damage. Final tips. As I mentioned earlier, you want to get Furious Appetite and Frenzied Blows as quickly as you can and come back to Soldier and Warmonger afterwards. It is a must-have for any melee build, and you'll be a lot more effective once you gain it. Make sure to unsocket gems from your old weapons and armor before selling them. You'll want the Topazes and Sapphires for fire and shadow damage. These are not always easy to find, so there's no point in wasting them. Better to lose a bit of gold than have to farm an hour to get one. Be sure to check the damage values on your skills from time to time against some of the passives that change your damage type. Sometimes they will do more or less damage depending on what passives you've acquired, and this changes throughout the evolution of this build. For instance, once you gain Initial Spark and Conflagration, some skills that deal physical damage will actually do better than converting them to some other type of damage that isn't fire. So check now and then to make sure you're doing the most damage possible. Lastly, I cannot understate how much attack speed really brings out the best in this build and changes the damage of Slayer's Fury. The attack animation is much faster than the damaging tick, so play around with agility or attack speed increases and see how much you enjoy the difference. Be sure to check out our other Wolcen Lords of Mayhem guides and stay tuned for more builds, including the beginner and endgame builds such as the Wolcen Mage build, Oracle of Flames, or the Ranger White Arrow build.